The first time I heard Brenda Sullivan's shrill voice screaming across my property line about the generator, I knew my peaceful life in Cypress Springs, Florida, was about to become a living nightmare. I'm Xavier Irving, and I'd moved to this gated community in Polk County about 6 months earlier, thinking I'd found paradise. The house sat on 2 acres, backing up to a small lake with Spanish moss draping from the oak trees like nature's curtains. What really sold me on the property, though, was the price. It was suspiciously cheap for such a nice area, and the realtor had been vague about why. I should have known better, but after years of apartment living in Tampa, I was desperate for space and privacy. The catch revealed itself slowly. First, the homeowner association rules arrived in the mail, a 47-page document outlining everything from acceptable mailbox colors to the precise angle your garden hose could be stored at. Then came the monthly meetings, mandatory according to Section 12, Paragraph 4. And finally, I met Brenda, the HOA president who'd held the position for 8 consecutive years, and treated it like she was running a small dictatorship. But none of that mattered as much as what I discovered during the home inspection that my budget inspector had missed. My property sat at the lowest elevation in the entire development, and underneath my backyard was the main lift station that pumped sewage uphill to the county's main line. The previous owner had installed it when the neighborhood was developed, and according to the property deed, I was now responsible for maintaining it. The lift station ran on electricity, pumping waste from 19 houses, including my own, up a 40-foot elevation gain. If it stopped working, sewage would back up into everyone's basements and yards within hours. The previous owner had installed a backup generator specifically for this reason, a Generac 22 kW unit that sat on a concrete pad behind my detached garage. It kicked on automatically whenever the power went out, which in Florida during hurricane season happened fairly regularly. I learned all this 3 months into living there when a summer thunderstorm knocked out power for 6 hours. The generator roared to life at 3 in the morning, and by 7, Brenda was pounding on my door in her pink velour tracksuit, her blonde highlighted hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. "That noise is unacceptable," she announced without greeting. The HOA bylaws clearly state that no machinery can be operated before 8 a.m. on weekdays or 9 a.m. on weekends. I'd still been half asleep, standing in my doorway in basketball shorts and a faded University of Florida t-shirt. "It's a backup generator. It runs automatically when the power goes out. I don't care what it is. The noise ordinance applies to all mechanical devices." She thrust a printed copy of the bylaws at me, the relevant section highlighted in yellow. "Madam, that generator powers the lift station. If it doesn't run, sewage backs up into everyone's property." Brenda's face had twisted into an expression of disgust and dismissal. "That's not an HOA problem. That's your problem. The generator is on your property, therefore it's your responsibility to ensure it complies with community standards." That conversation had been 4 months ago, and Brenda had been on my case ever since. She'd sent certified letters, emails, and even showed up with the HOA's lawyer, a weaselly guy named Martin Pierce, who specialized in property law and seemed to enjoy making homeowners miserable. The generator itself was perfectly legal according to county code. I'd checked with the building department, the environmental services division, and even had an engineer inspect the whole system. Everything was up to code and properly permitted. But Brenda didn't care about county regulations. She cared about HOA rules, and in her mind, those superseded everything else. Things came to a head on a Wednesday in late October. Hurricane Melissa was churning through the Gulf, projected to make landfall somewhere between Clearwater and Fort Myers. Everyone in Cypress Springs was preparing, bringing in patio furniture, stocking up on water and batteries, and gassing up their vehicles. I'd done all that plus performed maintenance on the generator, checking the oil, testing the automatic transfer switch, and making sure the fuel tank was topped off. Brenda appeared around noon, accompanied by Martin Pierce and 2 other HOA board members I vaguely recognized from the mandatory meetings. Janet Worth, a woman in her 60s who always wore too much perfume, and Derek Hamilton, a retired accountant who rarely spoke but nodded along with whatever Brenda said. "Xavier," Brenda called out as I was securing the shutters on my back windows. "We need to talk." I climbed down from the ladder, wiping sweat from my forehead. The air was thick and still, that eerie calm before a storm. "Kind of busy right now, Brenda. This won't take long." Martin Pierce stepped forward, holding a manila folder. "We're here to deliver an official cease and desist order regarding your generator." I stared at him. "You're joking. There's a hurricane coming." "The timing is unfortunate," Brenda said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But you've had months to address this issue. The HOA has voted, and we're requiring you to disconnect the generator until you can install proper sound dampening equipment that meets our community standards. That generator is the only thing keeping sewage from backing up into 19 houses," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Including yours, Brenda. Your house is on the same line." She waved her hand dismissively. "The power will probably stay on anyway, and if it doesn't, the county can deal with it. The county doesn't maintain private lift stations. That's my responsibility, and the generator is essential equipment." Martin Pierce cleared his throat. "Actually, according to Florida Statute 720, the HOA has the authority to enforce reasonable restrictions on property use within a planned community. The noise ordinance is clearly stated in the bylaws you agreed to when you purchased the property." "Reasonable being the key word," I shot back. "There's nothing reasonable about requiring me to shut down emergency equipment during a hurricane." "Then you should have installed it with proper sound dampening in the first place," Brenda said. "The previous owner should have, really, but you're the current owner, so it's your problem now." I looked at the other board members. Janet was studying her manicured nails, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict Brenda. Derek just looked at the ground. "I'm not shutting it down," I said flatly. "If you have a problem with that, take me to court." Brenda's face flushed red. "We will. And we'll fine you $500 per day until you comply. Those fines are legally enforceable and can result in a lien on your property." "Fine me. Send it to collections. I don't care. That generator stays operational." Martin Pierce scribbled something on a legal pad. "You're acknowledging that you intend to willfully violate the HOA bylaws." "I'm acknowledging that I'm not going to let sewage flood into my neighbors' yards, because Brenda doesn't like the sound of a generator that runs maybe 20 hours a year." "We'll see what a judge has to say about that," Brenda snapped. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her golf cart, her entourage following behind. Hurricane Melissa hit that night around 10 p.m. The power went out at 11:45, and I heard the generator kick on with its familiar rumble. I was lying in bed, listening to the wind howl and debris slam against the shutters, feeling a grim satisfaction that the lift station was still pumping. The hurricane wasn't as bad as predicted. We got about 80-mile-per-hour winds and 6 inches of rain, but no major damage in our area. The power stayed out for 2 days, though, and the generator ran continuously. I checked on it every few hours, refilling the propane tank from my reserve supply. On day 2, Brenda showed up again. The streets were still covered in branches and palm fronds, and most people were busy cleaning up their yards. She picked her way through the debris in white capri pants and a turquoise blouse, completely inappropriate for the conditions. "The noise has been unbearable," she announced. "My lawyer is filing for an emergency injunction on Monday." "Your sewage is flowing uphill instead of backing into your basement," I replied. "You're welcome. Don't be dramatic. The power would have come back on eventually. It's been 2 days. Without that generator, you'd have raw sewage in your yard right now." She made a face. "That's disgusting and completely irrelevant to the noise violation." I lost my patience then. "You know what, Brenda? You want me to shut it down? Fine. Let's shut it down right now and see what happens." Her eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. Try me. You've been complaining for months about this generator. Let's run an experiment. I'll turn it off and we'll see how long it takes for your yard to flood with sewage." "You wouldn't dare." Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the stress of the hurricane, or the months of harassment, or just the sheer stupidity of arguing about a generator that was literally preventing a public health disaster. "Watch me." I walked to the generator and hit the off switch. The sudden silence was jarring after 2 days of continuous noise. The unit powered down with a descending whir, and then there was just the sound of wind in the trees and distant chainsaws. Brenda looked shocked. "You actually did it. You got what you wanted. No more noise." "But what about the lift station?" "Not an HOA problem, remember. That's my problem. And right now, I'm deciding it's not worth dealing with." Her face went through several expressions: confusion, anger, and then a dawning realization that she might have made a mistake. "You can't just let sewage back up." "Why not? You told me to shut down the generator. I shut down the generator." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Brenda? Because I've been trying to explain this to you for months and you wouldn't listen." She stood there sputtering for a moment, then turned and practically ran back to her golf cart. I watched her drive away, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and dread. I knew I'd just made things worse, but I was so tired of being reasonable while she was being ridiculous. I left the generator off for 4 hours. That's how long it took for the lift station's holding tank to fill up and start backing up into the lateral lines. The first sign was a gurgling sound from the drains in my house. Then my neighbor 2 doors down, a nice retired couple named Pete and Maria Thompson, called me in a panic because their toilets were burping up water. I went and turned the generator back on immediately. The lift station kicked in and started pumping again, but the damage was done. Sewage had backed up into 3 different houses' plumbing systems, not flooding their homes exactly, but enough to cause problems with drains and toilets. Pete and Maria had to call a plumber to clear their lines. So did Jeff Morrison, who lived 4 houses down and had 3 kids under 10. The neighborhood went ballistic. People were posting in the Cypress Springs Facebook group, demanding to know what happened. Some blamed the hurricane damage. Others had seen Brenda at my house and correctly guessed there was a connection. Brenda tried to control the narrative. She posted that I had negligently shut down essential equipment, without mentioning that she'd been pressuring me to do exactly that. Several people jumped to her defense, calling me irresponsible and demanding the HOA take action. But Pete Thompson, bless him, posted the whole story. He explained about the lift station, the months of harassment, and Brenda's ultimatum about the generator. He even posted photos of the certified letters she'd sent me threatening fines and legal action. The Facebook group exploded. People took sides immediately. About half supported Brenda, saying I should have installed sound dampening regardless of whether it was required. The other half were furious with her for creating a problem where none existed. I stayed off social media and focused on documenting everything. I took photos of the generator, the lift station, the property lines, and the backed-up plumbing. I saved every email, letter, and text message related to the dispute. I had a feeling I was going to need all of it. On Monday morning, a sheriff's deputy knocked on my door. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a crew cut and a professional demeanor. "Xavier Irving?" he asked. "That's me. I'm Deputy Collins with the Polk County Sheriff's Office. I need to talk to you about a complaint regarding a sewage backup incident." My stomach dropped. "Come in." We sat at my kitchen table and I explained the whole situation. The lift station, the generator, Brenda's complaints, the hurricane, and my admittedly stupid decision to shut down the generator to prove a point. Deputy Collins took notes, his expression neutral. "So you intentionally shut down equipment that prevents sewage backup?" After months of being harassed to do exactly that, yes. The HOA president has been threatening me with fines and legal action if I didn't comply with a noise ordinance that doesn't account for essential equipment. "But you knew shutting it down would cause problems." I knew it could. I honestly didn't think it would happen that fast, and I turned it back on as soon as I realized people's plumbing was backing up. He nodded slowly. "Okay, here's the situation. The health department has been notified about the sewage backup. They're going to want to inspect the lift station and make sure everything's up to code. If they find any violations, you could be facing fines or even criminal charges for creating a public health hazard. The lift station is up to code. I had it inspected 3 months ago. Good. Keep that documentation handy. As for the criminal aspect, several residents have filed complaints. The state attorney's office will review the case and decide whether to press charges." "What kind of charges?" "Could be anything from reckless endangerment to criminal mischief. Depends on how the state attorney views your intent." After he left, I sat in my kitchen feeling sick. I'd been so focused on proving Brenda wrong that I hadn't considered the legal ramifications of deliberately shutting down the lift station. Even if I'd only done it because of her pressure, I'd still made the choice. I called a lawyer that afternoon. Her name was Rachel Freeman, and she specialized in property disputes and HOA cases. Her office was in Lakeland, about 30 minutes from Cypress Springs. "This is a mess," she said bluntly after I explained everything, "but it's a mess we can work with. First, you need to document every interaction you've had with the HOA. Every letter, email, phone call, everything. Second, we need statements from your neighbors about the lift station and the generator. Third, we're going to file a counter-suit against the HOA for harassment and attempting to force you to violate county health codes. Can they actually fine me for running the generator? They can try. But Florida law has specific provisions for essential infrastructure, and a sewage lift station absolutely qualifies. The HOA's noise ordinance is valid for things like lawn mowers and music, but it can't override public health requirements. So I've been right this whole time, mostly. Where you screwed up was shutting down the generator deliberately. That's going to be hard to defend, even if you were provoked. The health department inspection happened 3 days later. 2 inspectors spent 4 hours examining the lift station, checking the wiring, testing the pumps, and reviewing all my maintenance records. They found everything in compliance with county codes. "This is a well-maintained system," the older inspector told me. He was a man in his 50s with gray hair and a weathered face that suggested he'd spent a career dealing with Florida's infrastructure challenges. Whoever installed it knew what they were doing. So no violations, none that we can see. The backup was caused by the pump being shut down, not by any mechanical failure or code violation. "Can you put that in writing? We'll file a report. You should get a copy within 2 weeks." That was one problem solved at least. But the criminal investigation was ongoing, and the HOA situation was getting worse by the day. Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Thursday. According to the bylaws, I had the right to attend and speak in my own defense. Rachel advised me to go and stay calm no matter what happened. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a building near the front entrance with a meeting room, a small gym, and a pool. About 40 people showed up, which was a huge turnout compared to the usual dozen or so who attended regular meetings. Brenda sat at the head table with the other board members, Martin Pierce, Janet Worth, and Derek Hamilton. She dressed for the occasion in a navy blazer and pearls, looking like she was presiding over a congressional hearing instead of a neighborhood dispute. This emergency meeting has been called to address the sewage incident of October 28th, Brenda began, reading from prepared notes. As you all know, Xavier Irving deliberately shut down his generator, causing sewage to back up into multiple homes and creating a public health hazard. This meeting is to determine appropriate action by the HOA. I raised my hand. I'd like to speak. You'll have an opportunity during the comment period, Brenda said dismissively. Actually, Rachel stood up from where she'd been sitting next to me. Florida Statute 720.303 requires that Mr. Irving be allowed to address any allegations against him before the board votes on any disciplinary action. Brenda's jaw tightened. And you are? Rachel Freeman, Mr. Irving's attorney. A murmur went through the crowd. Several people looked uncomfortable. Bringing a lawyer to an HOA meeting was generally seen as escalating things to a hostile level. Fine, Brenda said. Mr. Irving, you have 5 minutes. I stood up, my notes trembling slightly in my hand. I want to be clear about what actually happened. For the past 4 months, President Sullivan and the HOA board have been demanding that I shut down my backup generator, threatening me with fines, legal action, and liens on my property. This generator is not decorative. It's not a luxury item. It powers the lift station that prevents sewage from backing up into 19 homes, including President Sullivan's. That's irrelevant to the noise violation, Brenda interrupted. Let him finish, Pete Thompson called out from the back row. I continued. I tried explaining this to President Sullivan multiple times. I showed her the county permits, the engineering reports, and the maintenance records. I offered to install additional sound dampening, even though the generator already meets all noise requirements under county code. Nothing was good enough. She wanted it shut down, period. I never said to shut it down permanently, Brenda objected. You said to disconnect it until I installed sound dampening equipment that met your personal standards, which you've never defined, during a hurricane, when the power was already out. Rachel touched my arm, a gentle reminder to stay calm. So yes, I said, I made a mistake. After months of harassment, after being threatened with legal action for operating essential equipment, I shut down the generator to prove a point. It was stupid, and I regret it. But this situation exists because the HOA has been trying to force me to violate county health codes. That's not true, Brenda said hotly. We simply asked you to comply with community standards. Community standards that would result in sewage flooding into people's yards. I shot back. Martin Pierce cleared his throat. The HOA's position is that Mr. Irving should have installed sound dampening before the generator was needed, not after. The generator was already installed when I bought the house, I said, and it meets all legal requirements for noise levels. The HOA is trying to impose additional requirements that have no basis in law or necessity. Rachel stood again. If I may, I'd like to clarify something for the board and the residents. Florida law is very clear that HOA restrictions cannot supersede health and safety requirements. The lift station on Mr. Irving's property serves 19 homes. If it stops functioning, sewage backs up within hours, creating a serious public health hazard. No HOA bylaw can legally require a homeowner to shut down equipment that prevents that kind of hazard. "We're not requiring him to shut it down," Brenda insisted. "We're requiring proper sound dampening," which costs approximately $12,000 according to the quotes Mr. Irving received, and which he's under no legal obligation to install since the generator already complies with county noise ordinances. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. People started shouting questions and accusations. Some demanded to know why the HOA was harassing me over a generator that protected their properties. Others insisted that property values would decline if generators were allowed to run without restriction. Jeff Morrison, the father of 3 whose plumbing had backed up, stood and pointed at Brenda. "My kids couldn't use the bathroom for 6 hours because of this nonsense. I don't care about the noise. I care about my toilets working," Maria Thompson agreed. "Pete and I had to pay $300 to a plumber to clear our lines. Who's going to reimburse us for that? The HOA is not responsible for plumbing issues on private property," Martin Pierce said. "But you're responsible for harassing the guy who prevents those issues," Pete shot back. Brenda tried to regain control by banging her gavel, but the meeting was beyond saving. After 20 minutes of shouting matches and accusations, she finally called for a vote on whether to fine me for the sewage incident. The vote was 7 in favor, 18 against, with 15 abstentions. The measure failed. Brenda looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "This meeting is adjourned." People filed out, and several came up to me to express support, but just as many glared at me, clearly blaming me for the sewage backup regardless of the circumstances. I thought that would be the end of it. The HOA had voted not to fine me, the health department had cleared me of any code violations, and the sheriff's investigation seemed to be going nowhere since I'd clearly been provoked and had remedied the situation quickly. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I received a notice from the Polk County State Attorney's Office. They were charging me with criminal mischief and reckless endangerment. The charges stemmed from my deliberate shutdown of the lift station, which had caused property damage and created a health hazard. Rachel was furious when I showed her the charging documents. "This is ridiculous. You're facing criminal charges for something the HOA pressured you to do. Can we fight it? Absolutely. But it's going to be expensive, and there's no guarantee we'll win." Prosecutors have a lot of discretion, and if they think you intentionally caused property damage, they can make that stick. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for early December. In the meantime, I had to deal with the fallout in the neighborhood. Half the residents were on my side, understanding that the generator was essential. The other half viewed me as a troublemaker who'd caused a sewage backup out of spite. Brenda, unsurprisingly, was in the second camp. She continued her campaign against me, sending out newsletters to the community highlighting the dangers of unregulated equipment, and proposing new bylaws that would require all generators to be approved by the HOA board before installation. The proposed bylaws were clearly targeted at me, but they'd also affect anyone else who wanted backup power. Several residents who'd been considering generators for hurricane preparedness spoke out against the proposal, and it failed at the next general meeting. But Brenda wasn't done. She filed a personal lawsuit against me for emotional distress and diminished property value, resulting from the sewage incident. Never mind that her property hadn't been affected and that the incident had lasted only 4 hours. Rachel filed a countersuit for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and abuse of authority. She also filed complaints with the state against Martin Pierce for providing legal advice that contradicted established Florida law regarding essential infrastructure. The whole situation had spiraled into a legal nightmare that was costing me thousands of dollars and dominating my life. I couldn't work on my house, couldn't relax, couldn't do anything without thinking about the lawsuits and the criminal charges. The preliminary hearing finally arrived on December 10th. The courthouse in Bartow was a stately old building with high ceilings and marble floors. I wore a suit that felt too tight and sat next to Rachel at the defendant's table, watching the prosecutor shuffle papers. The prosecutor was a woman in her 40s named Amanda Chen, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She laid out the state's case efficiently. I had deliberately shut down equipment that I knew would cause sewage backup, resulting in property damage to 3 homes and creating a public health hazard. The fact that I'd been pressured to do so was irrelevant to the criminal liability. Rachel argued that I'd been subjected to months of harassment and threats of legal action, that I'd been told repeatedly to shut down the generator, and that I'd remedied the situation within 4 hours of realizing the extent of the problem. She presented the letters and emails from Brenda, the documentation of the HOA's threats, and testimony from Pete Thompson and Jeff Morrison about the HOA's campaign against the generator. Judge Patricia Morales, a stern woman with gray hair pulled into a bun, listened to both sides and asked pointed questions. She seemed particularly interested in the timeline of events and the HOA's role in the situation. "So let me understand this correctly," she said to Amanda Chen. The defendant was threatened with fines, liens, and legal action if he continued to operate equipment that prevents sewage backup. He shut down that equipment after being told repeatedly to do so, then turned it back on within hours when he realized the consequences. And the state believes this constitutes criminal mischief. The defendant knew or should have known that shutting down the lift station would cause property damage, Amanda replied. His intent was to prove a point by causing exactly that damage. His intent was to comply with the HOA's demands after months of harassment, Rachel countered. The fact that complying with those demands resulted in predictable consequences doesn't make it criminal. Judge Morales reviewed her notes for a long moment. "I'm dismissing the reckless endangerment charge. There's no evidence that Mr. Irving intended to endanger anyone. As for the criminal mischief charge, I'm going to allow it to proceed to trial, but I'm skeptical that the state can prove criminal intent given the circumstances." It was a partial victory, but I was still facing a criminal trial. Amanda Chen offered a plea deal: plead guilty to a misdemeanor charge of improper property maintenance, pay restitution to the affected homeowners, and perform 50 hours of community service. Rachel advised me to take it. "Fighting this at trial is going to cost you at least $20,000, and there's no guarantee you'll win. The plea deal gets you a misdemeanor on your record, but no jail time, and you can get it expunged after a few years." I hated it, but I took the deal. I paid Pete and Maria Thompson $800 for their plumbing repairs, paid Jeff Morrison $600 for his repairs, and signed up for community service at a local food bank. The civil lawsuits were still pending, though. Brenda's lawsuit against me and my countersuit against her and the HOA were scheduled for mediation in January. The holidays passed in a blur of stress and legal preparations. I spent Christmas alone, eating takeout Chinese food and reviewing documents for the mediation. My family was back in Illinois, and I hadn't wanted to explain the whole mess to them yet. The mediation took place in a conference room at a law office in Lakeland on January 15th. Brenda showed up with Martin Pierce and a smug expression. I came with Rachel and a thick folder of evidence. The mediator was a retired judge named Harold Garrett, a grandfatherly man with white hair and a patient demeanor. He explained the process and then met with each side separately to understand their positions. "What are you hoping to get out of this?" He asked me when we were alone in the conference room. "I want her to leave me alone," I said. "I want the HOA to acknowledge that the generator is essential equipment and stop trying to force me to shut it down, and I want reimbursement for my legal fees." "That's reasonable. What about Miss Sullivan's claim for emotional distress?" "It's garbage. Her property wasn't affected, and the whole incident was caused by her demanding I shut down the generator in the first place." Judge Garrett nodded. "I've reviewed the evidence you provided. The emails and letters from the HOA are quite damning. I'll talk to Miss Sullivan and see if we can reach an agreement." He was gone for nearly an hour. When he came back, he looked frustrated. "Miss Sullivan is refusing to drop her lawsuit. She maintains that you acted maliciously and that the generator creates an ongoing nuisance that affects her quality of life." "The generator runs maybe 30 hours a year," I said, "and her house is 300 feet from mine. There's no way she can even hear it." I pointed that out. "She's not interested in logic." We went back and forth for 4 more hours. Brenda refused every compromise, every settlement offer, every attempt at resolution. She wanted me to pay her $50,000, install sound dampening on the generator at my expense, and sign an agreement that I'd shut it down if she decided it was too loud. "She's insane," I told Rachel during a break. "There's no way I'm agreeing to that. Then we're going to trial." And honestly, I think that's our best option at this point. We have a strong case, and I don't think a jury is going to be sympathetic to her. The mediation ended without resolution. We were scheduled for trial in March. I spent the next 2 months preparing for trial and trying to live my life. The neighborhood had mostly moved on from the sewage incident, though Brenda continued to glare at me whenever we crossed paths. She'd also started harassing other residents about minor violations, trying to reassert her authority after the failed vote to fine me. She went after Pete Thompson for having a vegetable garden that allegedly violated the landscaping standards. She cited Maria Thompson for parking her car on the street overnight instead of in their garage. She even tried to fine the family with 3 kids for having toys visible in their yard. People were getting fed up. A group of residents started a petition to recall the HOA board and hold new elections. They needed 30% of the homeowners to sign, which was about 50 signatures out of the 168 houses in Cypress Springs. They got 87 signatures in 2 weeks. The recall election was scheduled for February 20th, 2 weeks before my trial. Brenda fought it every step of the way, claiming the petition was invalid, that the signatures were forged, that the whole process violated HOA bylaws. But the petition had been organized by a lawyer who lived in the community, and everything was done by the book. On election day, I voted along with about 90 other residents. The results were counted that evening, and Brenda was removed from the board by a vote of 73 to 17. She showed up at my house the next day, looking haggard. Her hair wasn't styled, her clothes were wrinkled, and she had dark circles under her eyes. "This is your fault," she said without preamble. "You turned everyone against me. You did that yourself," I replied. "You couldn't leave well enough alone. That generator is a nuisance. It violates community standards. It prevents sewage from flooding into yards. That's more important than your arbitrary standards. You're going to regret this. My lawsuit is still active, and I'm going to make sure you pay for everything you've done." "Looking forward to trial," I said, and closed the door. The new HOA board was elected a week later. Pete Thompson was voted in as president, along with 3 other residents who'd been vocal about reforming the HOA's approach to enforcement. Their first action was to review all pending violations and fines. Their second action was to review the lawsuit against me and the HOA's involvement in it. Pete called me 2 days after taking office. "Can you come to the clubhouse? We need to talk about some things." I met with the new board that evening. Pete, Maria, and the 2 other board members, a guy named Steve Patterson who worked in IT, and a woman named Lisa Chen who was a school teacher, sat around the table looking serious. "We've reviewed all the correspondence between you and the previous board about the generator," Pete said. "We also talked to the county about the lift station and our responsibility for it." "Okay," I said cautiously. "Here's the thing. The lift station serves 19 homes, but it's on your property and you're solely responsible for maintaining it. That doesn't seem fair, especially since the HOA has been making it harder for you to maintain it properly." "I've been saying that for months. We know. So we're proposing a solution. The HOA will take over ownership and maintenance of the lift station and the generator. We'll form a committee to handle it, budget for regular maintenance and repairs, and spread the cost across all affected homeowners. That way you're not bearing the entire burden and the HOA can't claim the generator is a private nuisance." I stared at them. "You do that. It makes sense. The lift station is community infrastructure, even if it happens to sit on your property. And honestly, after reviewing what Brenda put you through, we feel like the HOA owes you more than that." "What about the lawsuit?" Steve Patterson spoke up. "We're going to withdraw the HOA's support for Brenda's lawsuit. She's suing you as a private citizen at this point, not as HOA president. The HOA won't be paying her legal fees anymore or backing her claims. Can you do that?" We consulted with a different attorney, not Martin Pierce. He confirmed we can withdraw from the case since it was filed after the incident, not as an official HOA action. The relief I felt was overwhelming. Having the HOA on my side instead of against me changed everything about the case. Brenda's lawsuit went to trial on March 5th. Without the HOA's backing, and with the new board willing to testify on my behalf, her case fell apart quickly. Rachel called Pete Thompson, Maria Thompson, and Jeff Morrison to testify about the generator's importance and Brenda's harassment campaign. She presented the emails and letters showing months of threats and demands. She showed the health department's report confirming that the lift station was essential and well-maintained. Brenda's lawyer, a different attorney since Martin Pierce had been sanctioned by the state bar for his advice regarding the generator, tried to argue that I'd still intentionally caused property damage. But when Rachel showed the timeline of events and Brenda's own words demanding that I shut down the generator, the jury wasn't buying it. Brenda took the stand and made things worse for herself. She ranted about property values and community standards, but when Rachel asked her directly if she'd ever thanked me for maintaining the lift station that served her property, she couldn't answer. "You've lived in Cypress Springs for 11 years, Rachel said. "Your home is connected to the lift station on Mr. Irving's property. For 11 years, the previous owner and then Mr. Irving have maintained that equipment at their own expense, ensuring that your sewage flows properly. Have you ever once acknowledged that service?" "That's not relevant," Brenda stammered. "It's extremely relevant. You've been demanding that Mr. Irving shut down or restrict the operation of equipment that directly benefits you without considering the consequences or offering any alternative solution. Isn't that correct?" "I just wanted him to comply with the rules." Rules that you interpreted to override public health requirements and essential infrastructure maintenance. Rules that you enforced selectively against Mr. Irving while ignoring similar violations by other residents. Rachel then presented evidence of Brenda's other enforcement actions. The complaints against Pete and Maria Thompson, the family with toys in their yard, and a dozen other petty citations that showed a pattern of arbitrary and punitive enforcement. The jury deliberated for 2 hours and found in my favor. They also awarded me $70,000 in damages for harassment, legal fees, and emotional distress. Brenda looked devastated when the verdict was read. She left the courtroom quickly, her lawyer following behind trying to talk to her about an appeal. Outside the courthouse, Rachel shook my hand. "That's done. Congratulations. Thank you for everything. You're welcome. Now go home and enjoy your generator in peace." I drove back to Cypress Springs feeling lighter than I had in months. The lawsuit was over, the criminal charges were resolved, and the HOA was no longer my enemy. It felt almost anticlimactic after all the stress and fighting. The new HOA board followed through on their promise. They filed the paperwork to transfer ownership of the lift station to the HOA, created a maintenance committee, and budgeted $10,000 annually for upkeep and repairs. My property taxes decreased slightly since I was no longer solely responsible for the infrastructure. They also revised the HOA bylaws to explicitly exempt essential equipment like generators, sewage pumps, and emergency systems from the noise ordinances. The new rules were sensible, well-written, and actually designed to help residents instead of micromanage them. Brenda disappeared from the neighborhood after the trial. I heard through the gossip network that she'd moved to another gated community in Lakeland, presumably to find new people to boss around. Her house sold within a month, and a young couple with a baby moved in. The new neighbors, David and Kelly Morgan, came over to introduce themselves a few days after moving in. I was in the backyard checking the generator when they knocked on my back gate. "Hi," David called out. "We're your new neighbors. Wanted to say hello." "Xavier Irving," I said, shaking his hand. "Welcome to Cypress Springs." "Thanks. So we heard there was some drama with the previous owner and an HOA dispute," I laughed. "That's one way to put it. Yeah, there was a situation with this generator, all resolved now." "Good to know." "We've got a baby, so we're just hoping for a quiet neighborhood where people mind their own business." That's definitely improved in the last few months. New HOA board is much more reasonable. Kelly was looking at the generator setup. "Is that for the sewage pump?" "Yeah, the lift station is under my backyard. Powers 19 homes including yours now. Wow, that's a lot of responsibility." "The HOA took it over, actually. They maintain it now, so I just keep an eye on it and let them know if anything seems off." "That's a relief." With a baby, the last thing we need is plumbing issues. They were nice people, and I was glad to have normal neighbors instead of someone who'd spend their time looking for violations to complain about. Life returned to normal over the next few months. Hurricane season came and went, and the generator kicked on twice during summer thunderstorms. No one complained. The lift station ran smoothly, the HOA committee did regular maintenance checks, and Cypress Springs felt like an actual community instead of a battleground. I used the settlement money from Brenda to do some home improvements, including finally landscaping my front yard properly and building a deck off the back of the house. Pete Thompson helped me with the deck construction, and we became good friends. One evening in September, almost a year after the whole mess started, Pete and I were sitting on my new deck drinking beer and watching the sunset over the lake. "You know," Pete said, "that whole thing with Brenda and the generator might have been the best thing that happened to this neighborhood." "How do you figure?" It woke people up. Everyone just went along with the HOA because it was easier than fighting. But when they saw what she was doing to you, and when the sewage backed up, it made people realize that the HOA is supposed to serve us, not control us. Still could have done without the criminal charges and the lawsuit. Fair point. But look at where we are now. Better HOA, better community, and you've got a deck and $70,000. Most of which went to legal fees. Still, better than dealing with Brenda for another 8 years. I couldn't argue with that. The whole experience had been terrible while it was happening, but the outcome was positive. The neighborhood was better off. I'd learned a lot about property law and HOA regulations, and I'd made some good friends in the process. The generator hummed quietly in the background, doing its job without controversy. The lift station pumped steadily, keeping sewage flowing uphill like it was supposed to. And life in Cypress Springs, Florida went on peacefully. I never heard from Brenda again, though I did hear through the grapevine that she'd been removed from the HOA board in her new community after trying to ban children's bicycles from being left on driveways overnight. Some people never learn. As for me, I learned that standing up to unreasonable demands is important, but doing it strategically is even more important. I also learned that in a fight with an HOA, documentation is everything. Every email, every letter, every interaction matters when you end up in court. And I learned that community support matters more than anything else. Without Pete and Maria Thompson, without Jeff Morrison and the other neighbors who spoke up, I would have been fighting alone against a well-funded HOA legal team. Their willingness to tell the truth about the situation made all the difference. The judgment against Brenda was never fully paid. She declared bankruptcy 6 months after the trial, claiming she couldn't afford the $70,000 judgment. I got about $12,000 total before the bankruptcy was finalized. It wasn't what I'd been awarded, but it was enough to cover most of my remaining legal fees. Rachel told me that was common in these cases. People file lawsuits thinking they'll win, or at least that the other side will settle to avoid court. When they lose and get hit with a big judgment, they panic and file bankruptcy. So she basically gets away with it. Not exactly. She's got a bankruptcy on her record now, her credit is destroyed, and she lost her position and reputation in the community. That's not nothing. She was right. Brenda had spent years building her little empire as HOA president, and it all came crashing down because she couldn't leave one generator alone. There was some justice in that. The following year, the county did a comprehensive inspection of all private lift stations in the area after a major sewage spill at a different development. My lift station passed with flying colors, and the inspector specifically noted the quality of the maintenance and the backup generator system. This is how it should be done, he told me and Pete, who'd come along as the HOA representative. A lot of these private systems are barely maintained. Owners don't want to spend the money, and then they fail catastrophically. Your setup is excellent. That report got shared at an HOA meeting, and several residents came up to me afterward to thank me for dealing with the generator situation and for maintaining the lift station properly before the HOA took it over. It was validating after all the grief I'd gotten. I also got a formal letter of apology from the new HOA board, acknowledging that the previous board had overstepped and created an unnecessary conflict. They thanked me for my patience and for continuing to maintain the lift station during the dispute. It was signed by Pete, Maria, Steve, and Lisa, and I framed it and hung it in my garage next to my permits and inspection certificates. The whole experience made me cautious about HOAs in general. I joined a couple of online forums for people dealing with HOA issues, and I was shocked by how common these conflicts were. People getting fined for having the wrong color roses, or for parking in their own driveways, or for having solar panels that the board didn't approve of aesthetically. I tried to help where I could, sharing what I'd learned about documentation and legal strategy. I wasn't a lawyer, but I'd been through the process, and sometimes people just needed to know they weren't crazy for thinking the HOA was being unreasonable. Years passed. The generator kept running when needed. The lift station kept pumping. And Cypress Springs remained a peaceful community with a reasonable HOA that focused on maintaining common areas and enforcing sensible rules instead of harassing residents over minor issues. I eventually sold the house in 2028 to take a job in Georgia. The new owner was a retired engineer who appreciated the lift station setup and the generator. I gave him all my documentation, walked him through the maintenance schedule, and introduced him to Pete and the HOA board. "Any issues with the HOA I should know about?" he asked during the home inspection. "Used to be," I said. "But that got resolved. Current board is great. Just don't shut down the generator during a power outage. Wouldn't dream of it." Looking back on the whole situation, I'm glad it happened the way it did. It was stressful and expensive, and there were times I wanted to just sell the house and move somewhere without an HOA. But fighting back against Brenda's unreasonable demands led to real change in the community. It made residents more engaged and more willing to hold their HOA accountable, and it taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is the hard thing. Standing up to Brenda meant legal bills, stress, and a criminal charge. But giving in would have meant either shutting down essential equipment or bankrupting myself installing unnecessary sound dampening that wouldn't have satisfied her anyway. The generator incident became a local legend in Cypress Springs. New residents heard about it during their orientation meetings as an example of how the old HOA used to operate and why the community had voted for change. It became a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and a reminder that boards serve homeowners, not the other way around. I stayed in touch with Pete and Maria after I moved. We'd grab lunch every few months when I came back to Florida to visit friends. They told me the neighborhood was thriving, that the HOA was running smoothly, and that everyone's property values had actually increased after the board change because people wanted to live somewhere reasonable. Brenda's legacy was the opposite of what she'd intended. Instead of being remembered as a strong leader who maintained standards, she was remembered as a cautionary tale about what happens when you let a little bit of power go to your head. Her name became shorthand in the community for unreasonable enforcement and petty tyranny. The generator still runs to this day, maintaining the lift station and protecting the neighborhood from sewage backup. It's just a machine, doing what it was designed to do. But for me, it represents something more. The importance of standing your ground when you're right, the value of community support, and the possibility of positive change even in the face of stubborn opposition. If I learned anything from living in Cypress Springs and fighting with Brenda Sullivan over that generator, it's that homeowner associations are only as good as the people running them. A bad board can make life miserable for everyone. But a good board, one that listens to residents and enforces rules reasonably, can actually improve a community. And sometimes, it takes a fight to get from one to the other. The lift station pumps on, the generator stands ready, and life goes on in Cypress Springs, Florida. The sewage flows uphill like it's supposed to. Homeowners can sleep peacefully knowing their plumbing works, and the community learned a valuable lesson about the difference between rules and common sense. As for me, I'm more careful about HOAs now. Before I bought my house in Georgia, I read the bylaws thoroughly, attended a board meeting, and talked to several residents about their experiences. The HOA there is minimal, focused mainly on maintaining the entrance landscaping and organizing an annual neighborhood cookout. Perfect. But I'll never forget that generator in Florida, humming away in the night during power outages, keeping 19 homes functioning properly despite one woman's determination to shut it down. That generator represented everything good about preparing for emergencies, maintaining infrastructure, and looking out for your neighbors. And in the end, that's what won the day. Not legal arguments or bylaws or who had the better lawyer. It was the simple fact that the generator served a purpose, protected people's homes, and was worth defending. Brenda never understood that. She was so focused on enforcement and control that she couldn't see the bigger picture. And it cost her everything she'd built over 8 years as HOA president. Sometimes justice works slowly. Sometimes it takes months of stress and thousands of dollars in legal fees. But sometimes, in the end, the right thing happens. The generator keeps running, the neighborhood is better off, and the person who caused all the problems fades into obscurity with nothing to show for their efforts but a bankruptcy and a ruined reputation. That's good enough for me.